Hey there everybody, Joe here. Thanks for tuning in again. I want to sincerely thank you all for joining me for the adventure of painting that big fantasy themed mural that I just posted the finale video of last week. All of you who contributed ideas, commented along the way, you really made it worthwhile and a great learning experience for me. I really benefit from being challenged by all of you and the ideas that stream in. It made me feel like a little kid again, painting creatures and you know, otherworldly landscape. A lot of fun. So after all of that technical mumbo jumbo, I feel like doing some basic principles that I have found helpful in my career as a painter. I'm going to try to make a mini series of the very basic principles of landscape painting. Landscape painting is, if I were to break it down and define it, because I really love definitions, is an environment with an atmosphere. And so that atmosphere could be nothing at all, like outer space, or it could be like we have here on planet Earth, a blue sky. So how do you make objects disappear into an atmosphere? This is a very basic principle of landscape painting, and I'm going to show you a basic exercise that's very fun to execute and see yourself having success on a small scale. I highly recommend doing work on boards that you do not plan on keeping. I know the philosophy behind always saving your work. It represents where you came from, its history. There's all these reasons to save it, but I have benefited so much from having the freedom to produce garbage that I feel like so much of my progress is because of that freedom, just producing one piece of trash after another, because it's just not intended to be saved. And yeah, I mean, looking back, I wish I had every single thing in a pile, but that wasn't an option for me. So if it is an option for you, then more power to you. But I highly recommend just doing simple, quick exercises on disposable material so that you can just be free of the obligation to produce something permanent. When you're working on a project and the end result matters, you skip so much opportunity to learn because you can't afford to mess up your end result. This is why I enjoy so much doing something that is not for anybody. It's the end result is not what's important. It's the exercise, and it's for the fun of seeing yourself gain the ability and the understanding. So I want to demonstrate how to make objects go further or closer within a blue atmosphere, such as what is in our atmosphere with all of this blue sky. Paint is unique in the way that it's a bunch of translucent particles. That means that you can see through it. If something's translucent, you can see through it, but you still see the color that it has. It's not completely transparent like glass or something like that. So translucent paint is just millions of little particles that are overlapping on top of each other, and this is why when you put red paint and blue paint together, they cancel each other's colors out. You don't get this nice violet result that you normally would if you mixed blue and red light. Blue and red light, when they mix together and make a real pretty violet, like on your computer screen when you see the purple color anywhere on your screen, it's the red part of an LCD pixel next to the blue channel. The red next to the blue is just side by side, and they're so small and intermixed that you don't see the individual parts, you just see the mix of them. But the difference is that that is a side by side intermixing, where paint is particles on top of particles. So the red is stopping the blue light that is under it from escaping and stopping you from seeing it. And the blue, likewise, that's on top of the red is stopping the red light from escaping. They're very different colors, and they don't like to allow the other color to shine through them. So it's the same principle as 3D glasses, where you have the red lens and the blue lens, the older 3D glasses. The reason those work is because the right eye doesn't see what the left eye is seeing because of those very different colors. And so, you know, you make an image that has red and the blue. The blue doesn't show up to the eye that's seeing through a red lens. The blue of the picture doesn't show up to the eye that's looking through the red lens. Paint is unique in that way, that it's all of these translucent particles that cancel each other's colors, and so adjustment has to be made if you're trying to represent the natural world that doesn't do that. There is a lot of the natural world that does do that. When you have translucent water on top of some other color, it does that same thing. So there are times when you can simply mix the watercolor with whatever's under it and get a beautiful result. But in this case, with atmosphere, it's more like the side-by-side result. And so I have to counter the effect of the blue changing its color as it's filtered when it mixes with something. So I'm going to start with the blue atmosphere. So the first step to my exercise is just to put a blue atmosphere on this board, and I want to keep this as simple as possible. So I'm not going to do a gradient like I do in landscapes. I'm just going to do blue, light blue. So I need white and a little bit of blue. The blue that I use is, I typically am using this Duration. It's an ultra deep base. It says right here, and I asked them to put 11 ounces of their blue tint. They only have one at Sherwin-Williams, one blue, and it's the equivalent of a phthalo blue, and the sheen is satin. My other paints are similar, ultra deep bases with pigment added, except for the red and the yellow that are factory tinted bases. They just come off the shelf like that, so I don't have to have them tinted, but it's the same paint product. You can read more about the paints I like to use on my FAQ. That's muraljoe.com/FAQ. And so we're going to put a blue atmosphere on here. Now, working with water-based paint that dries quickly, so it can be helpful to put blobs of paint on that you want to use first and mix after you have the paint that you want to use in place. See, I didn't spread this out all the way to the edges before I had my desired results. Working with oil, mixing is the same. The pigments a lot of the time can be a little bit different, but the nature of mixing, what happens when you mix, it's the same with oil. The paint does not spread so quickly, and so I like to work with water base, but that's not to say that you don't get beautiful results with oil. I also like to work with oil, especially if I'm doing things that I want to take more time, focus on smaller details, or if I want to preserve heavier brush texture. I like oil too. But all right, we're just making a blue sky. I'm going to dunk my brush in water and just splat it on this surface so that I can get this to spread out a little bit more quickly. When you have colors like too dark right here, too light right here, instead of trying to brush it over like this dries your paint quickly, all that smearing, I go like this. Hit the dark color, hit a light area, dark area, light area, dark area. It flip-flops them and evenly distributes it. So it's a quick way to get a more even distribution of color. Okay, cool. There's an atmosphere, and that is meant to be all the same color. If it's not, then it's by accident. Now I'm going to let that dry and do some colors down here that I'm going to put into that atmosphere. So I'm going to do a quick rinse on my brush while that dries. Okay, now this will be fun. I'm going to put different colors that are going to disappear into this atmosphere. So I'll start with red. I'll just do the whole rainbow. I'll do all the colors across this board and make them disappear into this blue atmosphere. Now, if you're new to painting, you might wonder about terms like vanishing points, horizons, perspective, and so it's good to have accurate definitions. When you're starting something out, you want to be able to build your understanding on working definitions. And so a vanishing point is the point that you see between any set of parallel lines. So whenever you have two parallel lines going further and further away from you, they get far enough away that you can't see the distance between them, right? If I'm looking, these are two parallel lines, they get further and further. Things get smaller as they get further away, we all know that. And so at some point, they are a vanishing point because they've gotten so close together because they're so far away. There can be any number of vanishing points. I can put any number of parallel lines going any direction in my picture, and wherever they end, it could be anywhere on this surface, there will be a point where, two-dimensionally speaking, it makes a triangle. So this is, you know, my red surface disappearing into infinity, and I'm going to make it come to a horizon right here. So then, if that's a vanishing point, then how about a horizon? You have a surface that could be at any angle. And if you look at it like this, my hands are the surface, I look at it like this, I can't see the horizon because the horizon is way up here, way down here, way over there. I'm looking, you know, straight at the surface. But if I tilt it, then as I look to further and further points on that surface, at whatever distance my line of vision is completely parallel to that, that is where the horizon appears. If this is the ocean is the best example I can think of here on planet Earth, of a level plane that goes what seems like forever. When my line of vision becomes parallel with that ocean, then I'm going to see a horizon. It gets closer to my line of vision because they're parallel. As they get further away, the distance appears smaller. So it always gets closer but never crosses, because that would be parallel lines crossing, and parallel lines don't cross. So I'm looking parallel. So in my picture, wherever I want to suggest that the viewer is now looking parallel to whatever plane I've painted, so whether that's the ocean or a grassy meadow, whatever it is, wherever I want it to feel like the viewer is now looking straight across that plane, that is where the horizon is of that plane. So I'm creating just this kind of abstract looking level plane that's going to be made of rainbow colors. All right, there's red. Let's put another color. So in the same way that you have a horizon on the ground, you could have a horizon that you don't show, that you don't actually paint. That's the wall of a big building, and it might be vertical, but you're not going to see that horizon because the building stops before it gets there. You don't necessarily have to see a horizon for it to exist. You can see that I put gray on this board before I started painting. Gray is a pretty easy color to cover, except when you're doing a light color like yellow. So I'm going to add a little bit of white to it to make it cover better. When you're working with real bold primary colors, a lot of the times they can be kind of transparent, and so it's easier to cover a colorless gray sometimes than it is a white or some other color that might show through. Especially a gray that has the same brightness darkness value is another word for that. Okay, so if you do this exercise, don't get caught up in making these perfect lines. I'm just doing it for fun. Now, I'm not adding atmosphere color at all to this just yet. I'm just mapping out what I'm going to add atmosphere color to. Painting with bright colors is such fun. Let's do violet. And actually, I'm going to use my magenta. This is a color that is handy to have around, magenta. I keep this around. It's the color of a pomegranate. You cannot mix this color with any two colors as vividly as it comes by itself in this pigment. So I consider it a primary, just like all the rest of these colors. You might have wondered, what is a primary color? It's any color that you can't mix. So any color, if it's vivid enough, becomes a primary color, because when you mix colors, they only become less vivid, less colorful. I now have one very important element to a landscape painting, and that is perspective. The perspective is here because I have a horizon and a vanishing point. And as I said, I could have more than one vanishing point, but I made these all parallel strips of color that are going to one vanishing point. So now I'm going to add another element that creates depth, and that is causing these colors to disappear into this atmosphere. So when you hear someone say things get lighter as they get further away, or they get darker as they get further away, the truth of that is that they get more of the color of the atmosphere as they get further away, because they're getting buried in it. So I'm going to add the atmosphere color to each of these colors gradually as it gets closer to the horizon. But as I said at the beginning, paint will change color too much and make a result that is not natural. Blue tries to change to green when it mixes with any color. So, you know, it's it helps me to remember to think of it as a funny relationship. You know, it's kind of like it's trying to turn green, like Bruce Banner tries to turn to the Incredible Hulk when he's angry, right? And you don't want that to happen. So violet is the girlfriend that keeps the blue from turning green when it comes into contact with its opposites. The more opposite the color is from blue, the more it will try to turn green, and the more I have to add the violet to keep that from happening. So I'm going to start with the red. Now red is not the complete opposite of blue in terms of the way we see light. So it's close to opposite, but not the complete opposite. On your computer screen, every pixel is made of 3 different colors, and that would be red, green, and blue. And so those colors can simulate all of the different kinds of colors that we see. So an opposite in terms of those, you know, if you think about it in terms of being every color being represented by a different combination of red, green, and blue, then an opposite is whatever of those two is not in the other color. So blue, the opposite would be the red and the green, which would make yellow. Yellow would be the opposite. So the green channel on the pixel, its opposite would be the red and the blue, which would make violet. That's an easy way to think of opposites in terms of light rather than a paint color wheel. And it's helpful when you're trying to simulate the natural world. So I'm going to add blue, the same blue that was in the atmosphere. So when I do this, plus white, let's see what happens. Let's put a little bit more. I'm going to try to get this very close to the sky color. Now paint dries a little bit darker. Water-based paint dries a little darker than what it looks like when it's wet. But close is good. I don't need to worry about it being so accurate. Now watch what happens when this hits the red. Because the red and the blue take each other's colors away, you're going to see a dark result where the red meets the blue. Do you see that even though I mixed this light color, this color is lighter than this red, pretty significantly. But when the red mixes with it, the result is equally dark as the red, even though I added all that white to make it this light blue. Now, so the result is darker than it would be if it wasn't doing that overlapping of the particles. So that's just trying to understand it on more of a micro level. But you can just know that this is what happens when you mix different colors. If the colors were very similar, you wouldn't have that darkening effect in between them. And so that is the same thing that causes it to go green, because, you know, the green is the color that doesn't get filtered out. Anyway, I digress. Let's add violet. The blue's trying to turn green. That's what's happening. When you get this gray, not so violet. I mean, if it was turning violet, it'd look like this. It's turning gray. That's because the blue's trying to turn green. And when we have red and blue and green, we have all 3 of the colors and we get gray. All 3 of the colors that I explained can simulate the full spectrum. So what I do to make this look like a natural light result is add violet. So I'm going to put violet and white on here. And the more this mixes with red, the more I'm going to use the violet. So down here, I want to make sure I use violet. And that's going to mix more smoothly with the red without producing such a darkened result, because violet and red are more similar colors. So I'm just real quickly trying to put together a gradient that goes from the red to the violet. And then as I get closer to the horizon, there's less red, causing the blue to turn less green, so I don't need as much violet. I'm just going to wet my brush and see if I can use the paint that's already on there. So up in here, I have, here I'll just use pure violet right here. Let me put the violet. This violet has a lot of blue. You know, it's, I could also use this magenta. This is another way to use violet. That's a lot more violet than this red. So I can also use that down here and get a smoother gradient. But I don't want to make this demonstration too complicated. You know, in the end, as long as I'm adding violet, I'm accomplishing what I'm trying to do. So up in here, I might say that I just have a pure violet. If I want it to look really, really far, then maybe I'll add some blue and make it a blue violet. So at the very top, I'll go back to my blue and make it almost the exact same color as the atmosphere. And then that'll just make this look like it's disappearing into infinity. Okay, next color. Now, I've got orange and yellow. That was, you know, it's kind of a lot of blending. I'm gonna just see if I can do a yellow, and then if I'm able to blend it in with this and make some kind of an orange, I'll do that. But here, this is as different from blue as can be. Yellow is the opposite of blue. So I'm just going to add the opposite color. Now when I mix the exact opposite, the result is going to be gray. Let me show you what happens when I mix yellow and violet. Now this is kind of a bluish violet, so I might get a tiny bit of a greenish result. If it's a real good opposite, then my result should be very gray. That's pretty good. That's pretty great. So good enough for me anyway. So at the top where this is disappearing, I'm going to add more and more of this violet. And then just like with the red, once I get to enough of this violet and I want it to look like it's going toward the sky color, I'm just using the violet to not allow the blue to turn green. So whatever amount it takes, I'm just adding enough that it doesn't turn green. So let's find out if I add blue to this now, if it's going to turn green. White. All right, let's just put this across here. I can fix that later. Now to me that looks a little bit greenish. So that just means I need more violet. There we go. Now I'm going to add more and more yellow to this as it comes down. That looks a little bit green. What am I going to do? Add violet. Add more yellow. Doing pretty good on not turning green. And there are times when it's good for blue to turn green. Just like there are times when it's beneficial for the Hulk to come out, you know? Alright, this looks a tiny bit green to me. Maybe not, but just in case it's a little bit green, I'm going to add a little bit of that violet. And white, of course, because I have blue and white for my atmosphere, so I have to add white to it to get it to the right value, which means lightness or darkness. I try real hard to keep it, the gradient of value, consistent with the gradient of color. With the you know, I don't want this gray result in the middle to be brighter or darker than where it's coming from. I want it to be a smooth transition of brightness, just like it's a smooth transition of color. If you have both those things, then these gradients look a lot more natural. All right, I'll go ahead and try to throw in a little bit of orange. Let's see if I can pull it off. A little bit of red and yellow down here. And we'll put some red up in here. And more yellow right here. Then I'll add some white because it's dark. And I'll add some violet. Go right up in there to a point. Boy, this is hard. There's a lot of gradients. But don't worry about the gradients in between. If you do this, don't worry about trying to connect these colors in a nice even rainbow. I mean, it's a fun challenge if you're into difficult challenges. But it's not the purpose. The purpose is to see the atmosphere rule, you know, this rule about the blue and the violet working, you know, seeing that in action. All right, let's put a little bit more of that violet up in here and some white. There we go. We'll just leave it like that. I kind of lost the ends of my colors up in there, but you can see how those colors change and look like they get further away. Okay, now the green, same thing. I'll go green. Green is not that different from blue, so I shouldn't have to add much. We're going to do blue up here, green down here, white in the middle. Lighten this to the atmosphere color. Add a little bit of yellow to that phthalo green to get my green. So all I have is blue and white, just like my atmosphere, and I'm just mixing that with the green. But green is a little bit different than the blue, so I don't want this vivid turquoise. That doesn't look as natural as it will if I add violet to it. So not nearly as much violet that I have in my other colors. A little bit will be enough. A little bit of white with that violet so that it's equal in value to what the blue would be. Even green turns the blue to green. A little bit. I'm going to adjust this, that turquoise color. This is real bright turquoise, and so I don't need that bright turquoise color. That's where this mixed directly with the green, and I want to go straight from my green to a slightly violet version of that atmosphere. Yellow and green. Let's see if we can get this color again. This is the green I started with, a little more yellow. I got to put a lot of paint on there to keep it from drying too fast. Now I'm going to add blue, but I need to make sure I add a little bit of violet as well. So I'll put that violet in there and then add white to get it to the right value. I'm adding a little more blue and violet because that was a lot of white. Alright, that looks a little bit better. Now that looks more like the green disappearing into the atmosphere, just like the other colors. Okay, next is the blue. So let's make it a dark blue disappearing into the light blue. I'm laughing because that, I could really overcomplicate this. But when I have the same color disappearing into the same color atmosphere, I don't need to do much to change it. I can just do a straight gradient from that's just a gradient of value of darkness. And so I'll represent a blue that's a little bit darker than the sky, just for the fun of having the whole rainbow in my picture. Alright, there we go. Okay, now the violet. Now this is where I'll benefit from a little bit of planning ahead on how bright of a color to use. I can't get more violet than violet. So if I want to have a mixed result that looks natural, then I want to be able to make it more violet. And so I need to start a little bit less violet than this pure violet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this color instead. I'm going to take magenta and blue, which is going to make a slightly less vivid violet than if I just did my pure violet pigment. So this violet right here that comes right out of the can is more of a primary. If I add white to this, then you can just barely make out that it's just a little bit more violet. And maybe that's a bad example because they're almost exactly the same. However, what I'm going to do is use that violet because this is the more violet violet. I'm going to use that for my correcting of the tendency of blue to turn green. So even when it mixes with that magenta, it's still just slightly trying to turn green, which mutes this mixed result a little more than a primary result. So I've got violet up here. I'm going to add a little bit of blue right by the horizon where I want it to look furthest away, and then white to get it to the right value. See, I'm grabbing this color and putting it over here because I see that real light patch. Okay, so that's my white and my violet pigment. Now I'm going to gradually switch to my blue and magenta pigment that's just going to be a very slightly less vivid violet. The reason I do that is because I don't want any visible graying happening when my two colors mix. I don't want it to look too colorless. and that part where my blue violet is meeting my red violet. And so if I start with my most vivid violet that I have, it's going to be more gray when I mix it with anything. And so it's a micro adjustment. I could have just used that pure violet, you know, and it would have been fine because it's just such a tiny difference. I guess I'm just, you know, really into understanding the things down to the tiny details, but not necessary. Adding a little bit more blue in there to make it look further away. Up here I'll add a little bit more of my blue and white. Look at me really working hard to get that straight horizon on this practice board that I'm going to throw away. But it's so you can see the effect, so that you can see that it's true and that it works. So in the end, we can learn from this that blue is married to violet. And everywhere that blue goes, violet goes to make sure that the blue doesn't turn too green when it comes into contact with its opposites.